Sometimes we'll be approached by people who have been charged with DUI, but they weren't driving the car. And I'm not talking about the cases where they're sitting in the car and the car wasn't moving, but literally they were a passenger in the car. Somebody else was driving, but they got charged with DUI. Kind of an odd circumstance, but it can happen, called DUI by consent or by allowing. And so, can you explain a little bit how that would come about?
Sure. So in most instances, what happens is the owner of the vehicle is in the passenger seat or somewhere in the vehicle, and the driver is impaired, pulled over for DUI. The officer does their full investigation with regards to the driver. Don't approach the passenger. Don't ask them any questions about what happened, any knowledge that they have with regards to whether the driver is impaired or not. But the officer jumps to the conclusion once they determine the passenger was the owner of the vehicle that they allowed that individual to drive. They gave them consent to drive the vehicle, and therefore they are charged with DUI by consent. It has the same penalties as a normal DUI. You can lose your license, you can go to jail, the same exact penalties as a DUI as if you were driving. But a lot of the times, the investigation is lackluster. The officers don't ask that individual whether they know that the driver was impaired and allow them to drive anyways. Doesn't ask them where they came from, if they were with the driver. All questions that are essential to prove that the passenger actually consented to this individual driving impaired. Another interesting issue with it as well is when we cross examine officers about this issue, an officer loves talking about how important standardized field sobriety testing is to determine if an individual is impaired. And that without those tests, it may be difficult to prove if an individual is impaired or not. But that passenger has no idea how to conduct those field sobriety tests. They don't conduct those field sobriety tests on the driver. So all they have is to take the driver's word for whether they're impaired or not. And so it makes it really difficult for the state to prove their case in a DUI by consent case.
So it really comes down just to the knowledge of the person who either gave the consent or whose car it belonged to. They're not in a good position to do an investigation like an officer is, right?
Right, that's exactly right. I mean, you could be drunk as a passenger. That doesn't allow you to be guilty of DUI by consent. It has to be your vehicle, and you have to give consent to the driver with knowledge that that individual is impaired in driving the vehicle.